subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Naushad Forbes, the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, a leading Indian industrialist in his own right. Mr. Forbes, welcome to The Print.
Thank you.
So my first question to you is, of course, about the budget. Nirmala Sitharaman took 2 hours and 40 minutes. What do you think?
So, well, I was tired at the end of listening to the budget. I think she must have been exhausted.
I think that's why she just quickly, let go her papers and said, I'm sitting down.
So it was a very, very long budget speech. There's part A of the budget sort of covers schemes and programs. Part B of the budget covers taxation. Part A of the budget, I felt was too many schemes, just too many small things here, there, long lists and so on. And I didn't get a sense of the overall direction, even though she organized it very nicely, around different themes and so on. But I still didn't get a sense of where we were really going with Part A. Part B, I thought, had some pretty useful changes in the tax system that is going to move us as a country in the right direction. So I think in the longer run, Part B will be seen to be, I think, sensible, moving in the right direction. One big thing that I felt was missing, if you look at the economy today, we're currently growing at our slowest rate in 11 years by using official government figures. If you leave out government consumption, then we're probably growing at the lowest rate, certainly in nominal terms, in the last 40 years.
Under 5%.
Nominal terms at 7-8%, which is like the lowest in 40 years. Under 5% in real terms. And that needed to be, I think, more explicitly first recognized and then addressed.
So why do you think she didn't do that?
I don't know. I think, in private conversations, both with the finance minister and certainly with the prime minister as well.
So you met the prime minister before the budget?
I haven't, but in CI we have, and many groups of industrialists have.
Right.
And he's been very clear and direct in terms of saying, look, don't just tell me that everything's fine. I know things are not fine.
He says that he knows things are not fine.
That's right. And he says, tell me what needs to be done. Okay. So he's been very open and welcoming of input. I didn't see that recognition anywhere in the budget speech. Maybe that's the style of the government.
But what do you make of that? So in a sense, the Prime Minister does invite inputs, but then he doesn't do anything with it. So is it that he knows better, or do his advisors know better than you guys?
I don't think it's true that they've not done anything with the inputs.
Okay.
I just don't think it's part of the style of this government to accept that there's anything wrong
with the country.
Yeah.
But is there wrong? How much wrong is there with the country? Are we in a crisis? How bad is it?
So economically, I think we have things to address. I think we are in a serious situation, and I think all the indications that, look, this is something that's cyclical, I don't buy. There may be some cyclical factors underway where simply waiting for the cycle to turn will see a recovery. But I think there are some broader structural issues as well.
Like what?
And I think I read recently a really great new book by Vijay Kelkar and Ajay Shah.
Right.
It's called In Service of the Republic.
Yes.
I think it's one of the more important books to come out on the country and where we are in the last 5 years. And the reason it's such a powerful book, I think, is that they make the argument that if you want a $5 trillion economy, you need the infrastructure for a $5 trillion economy.
Right.
And by infrastructure, they do not mean roads and airports, they mean institutional infrastructure. In other words, you cannot rely on arbitrary decisions and power, regardless of how well-meaning it is, by politicians and bureaucrats. You need to rely on institutions to provide checks and balances.
So give me an example of this arbitrary decisions that bureaucrats are undertaking.
So for example, you have a problem. Industry isn't competitive, for example. So you go to the government. The government says, okay, we'll impose import tariffs, right? You impose import tariffs for a particular item, right? Yeah. Because you've imposed those import tariffs, some other sector that uses those outputs now suddenly finds it's not competitive. So it goes to the government and says, listen, we're not competitive now, right? So you impose tariffs there as well, right? And you end up with this cascading of taxes, all the while we keep saying that we're an open economy, we want to engage with the world, we want to trade more with the world, etc.
Do you remember Manmohan Singh when he was finance minister in 91 under the Narasimha Rao government when they opened up the economy? So it took a prime minister and a finance minister to do that. And again, Manmohan Singh, when he became prime minister in 2004, talked about animal spirits. But our prime minister Narendra Modi doesn't seem to have that economic big picture kind of a reform mentality.
No, I mean, I think he does have for example, the GST, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was a big bang reform.
What about demonetization?
Demonetization was without question, a big bang. I don't think it was a reform. I think it was a negative thing to do for the economy. But, it was big bang for sure.
Yeah.
Right? But I also don't think it was policy in a sense. It was more an act. But GST and the IBC were certainly major big bang policy reforms. And that, by the way, is the IBC is an example of institutional infrastructure.
Right.
That you need the infrastructure to resolve bad debts and NPAs. We didn't have it. We had instead this crazy institution called BIFR.
Right.
What was it called? The Bureau of Industrial and Financial Restructuring. Yeah. And where we were this unique company where, the rest of the world either had life companies or dead companies, we had sick companies, which were the ones that were referred to BIFR. It was a broken infrastructure. You had companies that would be in BIFR for 25 years. So it needed to be addressed in an institutional way. The IBC does that.
Right.
So that's the way we need to do policy, by institutionally putting in place the mechanisms so that you do not rely on a politician or a bureaucrat to take a call.
But when you do, or when a group of industrialists do meet the Prime Minister, not just before the budget, but otherwise as well, and you suggest to him that, say 3 things or 5 things need to be done, does he take your inputs on board?
Yes, I think certainly in these meetings, from everything that I've heard, the Prime Minister has been very receptive, has been listening, has been making notes, has been asking questions, has been engaging very actively.
But then
the
what
Finance
happens?
Minister too, for example, it's been a recommendation of CAI that we should move away from having both a dividend distribution tax and tax of dividends in the hands of recipients. That, do one or the other. Either have dividend distribution tax or have dividends taxed in the hands of recipients. Don't do this muddied scheme of both, right? And that's been addressed today in the budget, I think usefully, that you move to the older system of just taxing dividends in the hands of recipients. Okay, right? So some of this is being taken on board and done. Is the economy receiving enough priority at the highest levels of government? I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah?
What do you what do you think is receiving the most priority?
Unfortunately, I think too many issues on the social side are receiving too much priority at present. And I'm not particularly qualified to talk about those, but I do feel that they are deflecting our attention as a country, and certainly
like what? Give me an example.
Well, I think the Citizenship Amendment Act, all the discussion around the NRC, all of the protests that have been taking place against the CAA as well. These are divisive issues. These are issues that are, I think, dividing us as a country.
You think they're dividing us as a country?
I think they are. There are these, there are these very clear camps of pro and anti-CAA. You see people taking out any number of anti-CAA protests. So how do we engage with the anti-CAA protests? We mount pro-CAA processions.
Right.
But
we've seen in Delhi, and in Delhi, there's only a week or so to go before elections take place in Delhi, and we've seen the Home Minister Amit Shah coming out very openly and saying that Shaheen Bagh, which is this little locality in South Delhi, is sort of responsible for this polarization.
I mean, I think the polarization reflects a wider divisive message that we've been hearing, I think, from people certainly at, if not at the highest levels of government, certainly people who are in very influential positions, and I don't think it takes us forward as a country. I regret it.
But Mr. Forbes, industrialists like you don't speak up often enough. We've seen that this government has been, this is the second time that this government's come back with a huge majority. There are 303 seats in the parliament. Now, you've had a couple of people only. You've had Rahul Bajaj talk about these divisive issues. You yourself have talked. But that's two people out of hundreds perhaps in this country.
So it would be nice if many more did speak and voice their views, which they voice in private. Do you voice them in private? Every function, every cocktail party, every interaction.
What do you say?
And you'll hear people talking about all the things that I mentioned just now. I mean, you'll hear people talking about them and saying that they are diversions from what we should be doing as a country, and they aren't taking us forward.
And there is a regret in these conversations?
Oh yes, I think there's regret, there's concern, and I think fortunately, some of us. I personally feel that the government actually is less allergic to criticism than it's made out to be.
Mm-hmm. How do you say that?
In that, I think if you go to the government and you keep praising them, at some point in time they'll get very bored, right? Because what is the person learning from that conversation?
Sure.
Right? But if you go to them and it's not that you criticize. You don't have to criticize and oppose, but you can certainly offer suggestions, and you can certainly suggest how things could be better and done better. And I've always found that people in government are actually keen on input and want to hear you when you have something useful to suggest. I don't think they like criticism. No one actually, but not just the government. No one likes criticism. Right. So you don't need to criticize, but you can offer an alternative view and you can offer a different way of doing things. And I think the government's quite receptive to that, and we should use that receptiveness more to get our point across.
So two things then. On the one hand, are you saying that there are not enough of you people in the industry who speak truth to power?
Certainly publicly, I think there are too few people who speak truth to power.
But what are you afraid of?
Well, you should ask the people who don't speak.
I know, but the reason I'm asking is because
But
I'm just curious. Is why would you not? It is your country. It's my country.
I don't know. I think you should ask people why they don't speak, who don't speak. If you talk to, for example, the famous ET the famous ET Awards function. Rahul Bajaj asked these questions with Amit Shah, Nirmala Sitharaman and Piyush Goyal on the stage, right? So with three ministers on the stage, and he made the comments that he did. And Amit Shah responded to those comments very positively. And I think, and he said, look, no one should be afraid. But if people are afraid, if an atmosphere has been created that says that people are afraid, then it's something that we need to address. And I think we should take those comments at face value and say, look, this is the official view of the Home Minister and the government. And if that's the official view of the government, speak. Voice your opinion. Let it be heard. And if it's heard, the government will have something to respond to. And let's also be heard, and let's speak in a manner that's polite, that's forthright, but it's polite, it's positive.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, it says what we really believe.
Now, you're absolutely right, because if the Prime Minister is willing to take inputs on board, if the Home Minister is assuaging the industrial class and saying they're open to conversations, then perhaps it's your responsibility as well to
respond and say,
and to sort of meet them halfway. But I have another question, which is, you talked about Piyush Goyal. Now, Piyush Goyal, the Commerce and Industries Minister, in the last few weeks, has made some interesting statements. For example, with Jeff Bezos, amongst the richest men in the world, who was in India recently, and Piyush Goyal said, "We don't need your money."
I mean, I think Piyush himself would today say that sentence was highlighted to a much greater extent and in a context in which he probably didn't intend it at the time.
Having said that,
I mean, on the face of it, I think it's a statement that is not the position, not only not the position in terms of what the government says, but it's also not the position in terms of what the government has been doing over these last 6 years. This government has been saying, we want foreign investment. It's very proud of the fact that foreign investment is at a higher level today than it has been in previous periods. So I think what the government is doing says we want foreign investment. And I think that statement was an unfortunate statement that it's one of these things, you know, where these statements end up becoming the source of discussion and debate instead of the real issue, which is the real issue is how do we get the kind of foreign investment that we need? How do we attract more Jeff Bezoses into India? How do we get them to invest more? And Jeff Bezos didn't only talk about investing $1 billion. He talked about creating 1 million jobs.
Right. But basically,
don't we want 1 billion jobs? We want 1 billion jobs. Yeah. So please come. And I think the government is saying, please come most of the time in its actions. Some of this noise is part of us being a noisy democracy.
What does this do to somebody who wants to, to a foreigner who wants to come and invest?
So, you know, when I talk about India outside of India, the statement that I start with usually is that India is a noisy democracy. And if you expect everything in India to be
perfect,
systematic, logical, coherent, and coordinated with what everyone else is saying, go to another country. Go to China.
But they are going to China.
Right? And people do. Right? But if you expect India to be like China, it won't be. Expect India, when I talk in the US, I said expect India to be like the US. Right? US is also a noisy democracy. Right? You know,
but our economy is far smaller than China. China is 6 times larger than you. We're not a communist nation. We're proud to be a democracy. But having said that,
so we should be proud of our noisy democracy.
Okay.
But we should recognize that when we're a noisy democracy, statements will be made, preferably not by ministers in the union government, but statements will be made, sometimes even by ministers in the union government, that might contradict what you're hearing on other days. We just have to accept that. And we have to look and judge the country and the government and policy on what's actually being done in the longer run.
So you're back to the Hindu rate of growth, basically?
Not necessarily. That's the point. And that's the Vijay Kelkar and Ajay Shah point, which is that if you look at China, China makes things happen by, in a very top-down way. The leadership says X and X happens right down the line. When you go to China, one of the things that's striking to me is that whether you're talking to people in the government, well, in the central government in Beijing, or you're talking to people in a province, or you're talking to people, some local official, or you're talking to someone in industry, you hear the same thing. Or you're talking to someone from a think tank, you hear the same thing. They have the same priorities and they're advancing the same issue, right? In India, no such luck, right? I mean, you take two industrialists like us.
It was Deng Xiaoping who said to get rich is glorious.
Yeah, absolutely. But
this is not what your prime minister, our prime ministers are saying.
You'd have heard everyone in China, down from Deng Xiaoping, say the same thing, right? So that's
not such a bad idea, frankly.
It's not such a bad idea. In India, right? By the way, our prime minister at his Independence Day speech did say just that, right? He said wealth creators should be respected.
But you don't see it in the budget today,
right? No, I think today's budget speech had the FM saying the same thing about wealth creators and the importance of wealth creation. The economic survey has a whole chapter on it,
right?
Which came out
Forbes,
yesterday. So we do hear that as well. But in India, you'll hear many other voices as well, right? You'll hear people from the RSS saying something different. You'll hear people from, who are
Swadeshi economics.
You'll hear Swadeshi economics. You'll hear
But
all of this stuff.
Is that what's happening today? When you look around you today, is it Swadeshi economics?
You hear it all.
But is it Swadeshi economics? Would you define what's happening today? The lack of a big bang budget, no big idea, no grand vision.
So there's one element of Swadeshi economics that's happening today. But the great bulk of what we're doing is not Swadeshi economics. So the one thing that's happening today that's Swadeshi economics is, I believe we've moved backwards in these last 3 or 4 years from a trade liberalization perspective. We've seen growing import tariffs. We've seen tariffs imposed on a variety of different products, with, by the way, the government responding to arguments from Indian industry that you want protection here, there, and whatever. Right? And so I think that is an element of Swadeshi economics that we're seeing in practice. But if you take other counts, if you take moving away from public sector enterprises, privatizing enterprises, we're starting to use the word privatization again, which is a good thing and a healthy thing, right? If you see what was the comments that were made in the speech today about a taxpayer charter and trust in society. If you see some of the comments that are being made about, let's list LIC and have an IPO for LIC.
Right.
These
that
are not
was a good thing.
That's right. Very good moves, and these are not Swadeshi economics.
So last couple of questions, Mr. Forbes. Indians are leaving the country, Indians like you and me, and preferring to go live in Singapore, Dubai, and elsewhere. Why are they doing this? If they don't trust the government, is there a lack of trust or confidence?
So, I don't know if it's a lack of trust, but I think without question, there has been a rise in tax terrorism in recent years. And I think there's been a rise in, probably as the economy has grown, in sort of high profile arbitrary decisions. And it's the same point that
you were making
earlier. And if you have these kinds of arbitrary actions that people see, then you say, listen, let me go and invest somewhere where I can be more confident that things won't change in an arbitrary way. So I think it's a reflection of that more than anything else. I hope that's something that we can change in the next few years. Sort of since 1991, from 1991 through to about 2016, 17. Through to more than halfway through the first term of the Modi government. I think the general view that you'd hear from Indians who'd gone to study abroad and so on was that they saw more and more saw an attraction to coming back,
right,
and to living in India and making their lives and career here because they saw much more opportunity here. I think that's changed a bit in these last 3 years, and we need to turn it around again. It's very important to do, because if we can't hang on to our best and brightest, that's a very bad thing for the country. So I think we need to collectively make it much more attractive for people to come here and be here.
Mr. Forbes, thank you so much for speaking to The Print.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This is Jyoti Malhotra for The Print. Please continue to watch our YouTube channel. It's live and buzzing.